All right, we're back. We are MAPD124. That's Advanced iOS Development in the winter 2017 semester. Week 12, part 1 of our broadcast. We're talking about unit testing with Xcode, finally. So, first of all, do you guys know what unit testing is? You guys should have had some kind of information from Ilya, if I'm not wrong. But if you don't know, we want to try and test the smallest unit. That's why it's called unit testing in our code. And a unit usually refers to some function. I have a function or I have a value, and I want to test that value to make sure that what my expected outcome is going to be is equal to the outcome that I'm getting, right? Now, usually what we want to try and do is, and I'm just going to kind of talk about this like this, we want to kind of create a testable application too. Part of it is when we create it, we want to try and do test-driven development, right? It's a different mindset. TDD or test-driven development is not what we're going to be talking about today. We're just going to be simply talking about unit testing, because test-driven development is a whole topic that can take like a semester, right? It's not something that we can kind of skim over, right? The main things that you always want to think about are, actually there's 3 things, is when you start doing a test, you want to fail the test. That's the first thing you want. The test is supposed to fail. Why? Because if it doesn't fail, then how do you know that that's not always going to be true? It's always going to be positive, right? If it's positive, if it's a pass all the time, then there's no test, right? So you make sure it fails first. That's the first part, right? So that's the red in our test. We think about things in terms of red, green, and refactor. Those are the 3 things we think about with any kind of unit test. Red, it fails. Green, it passes. And then after it passes, we refactor everything if we can, right, to make it tighter. And usually that's due to the fact that we've done our test. Okay. We also want to use some basic design principles like don't repeat yourself, the dry design principle. So that test-driven development and unit testing in general helps us reduce code duplication, right? Because we look at our code so carefully. Now, I have to say that when we do test-driven development, it's very slow. It's much slower than regular development because every step of the way we are adding a test, everything we do, right? And it's really in depth. Now, at the enterprise level, if you're ever going to work in an enterprise like Bell Canada or someplace like that, and they're doing mobile application development, guaranteed there'll be test-driven development or unit testing at the very basic level to test everything, how it's going. Why? Because what it does, it reduces errors and rework, right? The majority of what we get rated on when it comes to working in a coding environment is rework. If, for example, you have a lot of rework, something you have to fix over and over again, it takes you to do the same amount of work as somebody else longer, right? That maybe you're not as efficient, or maybe you're not as good, or maybe you don't know how to do something. And so you're always tested on those things. Rework is one of them. Churn is another thing. How many times you change a file, right? Over and over and over again. If you change a file, a bunch of times, that's a bad thing. That means that, there's been a lot of changes in that file in a very short time. And if there's a high level of churn in a specific area, that could be bad and it could be good. It depends on what they're looking for, right? So churn, rework, those kind of things we want to reduce as much as possible with proper unit testing, which is what's the topic of this, the first part of this day. So I'm going to start with a new Xcode project. We're going to make a very simple Xcode project for this one because that's all we need. So single view application. Again, you can apply this to more complex applications, right? But for now, we're just going to make an application that basically shows us our favorite friends, right? Who are our top favorite friends? It's a list of favorite friends that we're going to have, and that's what it's going to do if we get to that point. So let's just call it MAPD124 _. We learned that trick. W2017, thank you for that. Lesson 12, right? That's what we're going to call this thing. I'm going to include unit tests for now. We're going to start with this one today, right? So unit tests, I'm going to stick to the iPhone as an example and click next. And we'll talk about what it does for us. We don't actually have to do that, but it helps us from a bare bones perspective. Okay, cool. So one thing is I want to change my iPhone 7 Plus. I always do this to a iPhone 6, some kind of a 6S or whatever. And notice that we have this other area here now. We have two projects. There's a main project that's up here, right? And this is for our user interface and the actual project itself, the product that we're producing, right? And down here, we have another section, which is the unit test section. Okay, so this part, and then there's this part. Okay, I'm going to get back to this in a second. But one thing I want to do is I want to put this all up on GitHub. So let's do that. Remember, GitHub is part of our protection that we use. You know, we want to kind of put everything up on GitHub when we're building things, just in case something goes wrong. And again, it's MAPD124, and then winter 2017, and then it's 12. All right, so I got this remote. I'm going to copy this thing, go back to here, go to source control, go to configure. We're going to configure a remote. You guys should know how to do this by now. Add a remote and put that in there and click that as done. And we're going to go to commit, and we're going to make our initial commit. Right, and we're going to push to this remote as well, and we're going to commit and push. Yeah, of course. Yay. All right, so that's done. So now that's all up online. Okay. Typical stuff. So what do I want to do? I think what I want today is when I do a favorite people thing, right? A list of favorite people, I'm probably going to put it in some kind of table view, right? If I was going to do that. Again, we may not get to the user interface part today because it takes long to do all this stuff, right? But let's talk about this one part right here, which is I'm probably going to create some kind of class to, that defines a person. What's a person? What do they have, right? And maybe my favorite people have some kind of image, maybe they have contact information or whatever. I don't know, right? But they're going to have something like that. And to keep organized, what I'm going to do is inside of my folder, I'm going to create a new folder or new group, if you will. We're going to call this our models group. So just rename this thing, models. And our model that we're going to be using, if we're at a new file, right, we're going to make it a new Swift file right now. Right, here we go. And I'm just going to call this the people or person. We'll call it the person class. Person.swift. There we go. That's our model, right? You can leave this alone. All we need to do is make a new class, which is the person class. We've done this before. And the person class itself, right, is going to be the first thing we're making, right? Now, if I was going to do test-driven development, I wouldn't even do this. I would start with nothing, right? Because the test will tell me how I format my entire application. I don't start with something I want to test. I start with 0. And then I build I compose my classes and my objects and everything from my tests. And that's a different way of thinking than what we have normally. We have a different way of thinking with these things. But let's just start with this for now, okay? And we'll talk about what I would do differently if I was going to start from scratch, okay? So we have our models. Because we have our models on the testing side, we want to also create another group, right? Please do this with me, or else you won't know how to do this in the right way. So we'll say, model tests, right? Or model tests, and inside there we'll create a new test, right? That we'll be using to test our model, our person class, right? Here is an example of a test suite, if you will, right? So each one of these, we can make many tests, and this is an example of testing the entire application. Notice my application is being tested as MAPD124, W2017 lesson 12, and I need to use this @testable modifier, right? So this is the decorator that I'm using @testable, and I'm importing my folder, which is MAPD124, whatever I called it, lesson 12, right? If I don't do this, I don't have access to my view controllers and anything else I have up here. I won't have access to it. Okay, so that's the first thing I need to do, import from this. Okay. Notice that it says import XC test, right? That is the type of test we're doing, Xcode test. That's what it stands for, right? And down in here, we have a couple of things. We have a setup and a tear down, right? In our setup, any kind of stuff we want to set up, for example, in our test itself, think about the setup as almost like a mini initializer. That's what it does. Initializes all our variables, anything we need in our local test class, okay? Because that's what this thing is, a test class. Tear down rips it down afterwards if you want to close it down. And these are a couple of methods that are example tests, okay? We're going to get rid of all these things. Okay, so those are going to get rid of these things. Okay, and that's what we would normally do. We wouldn't start with these things at all. Okay, but instead of using this MAPD W2017 test or whatever, I want to make one specific for models. So let's just get rid of this whole thing. So let's get rid of it. So we're not going to even get this thing moved to trash. So no tests. And let's start off with a new one. So hovering on model tests, the folder, right click, and I'm going to do a new file, right? And notice in here, the options are unit test case class, right? Which is what I want to choose. I want to choose this one, unit test case class, and click next. Now we have a chance to name our class what we want. And notice what we're testing is, we're testing our models, right? So we can call this the model test case, right? We can always call it model tests. It's up to you, right? Our language is Swift. We can also choose Objective-C, and we can subclass from XC test case or others. But those are the ones we want. Next, want to include this not inside of our project, but inside the test portion of our application. Okay, great. And we want to create a bridging header. No, because we don't need that for this application. If you want to use any kind of Xcode or Objective-C, you create a bridging header for that, all right? But we're not going to do that. Just like we did when we did our SQLite, all that stuff, we need to have that bridging header. And if we don't have that, then it wouldn't connect properly to Objective-C. So again, we're going to get rid of these test cases. These are just stubs, right? And one of the things it doesn't do is it doesn't import our models. We have to do again, testable, and then import, and then our application. So MAPD, right? 124. It's got to be exact, right? And then W2017, and then underscore lesson 12. If you don't do this, then you won't have access to the other files. Okay, so that's the first thing. Are we good? So again, what we want to do is we want to set up some way of testing, right, all the time. And because we're testing our model, all we care about is how the model initializes and all those kind of things, okay? A lot of times what we also want to do is we want to create an object of the model that we're initializing. So for example, maybe we want to call this the person model, right? So up here, we're going to use a variable that's in the class level. So var, let's say we're going to call this person, just to test our model itself, right? Which is going to be of type person, right? And we're going to make this an optional, or basically we're not going to initialize it here. Inside of our setup, right, because this is like an initializer, it looks like almost like a constructor for our tests. This is where we're going to do all of our initializing. Okay, so in here. So we're going to say person is equal to person, right? So now I can use person inside all of my tests instead of saying in every function person dot whatever it's going to be, right? This is the first part. So you want to kind of declare an object of the model that you're making. That you're testing a model. I'm testing the person. I'm testing a movie. I'm testing a list, or whatever. Any kind of data that I'm going to hold. Remember, my model is going to be related to the data that I'm going to be dealing with. Okay. So I start with a model test first. Okay. And by the way, if I was going to do a card shuffling application, then this would be called card. Okay. So if I'm shuffling cards, if I'm making, I don't know, some kind of card shuffling game or card game, I don't know, blackjack. I don't know why I'm thinking about these things. I'm not trying to do slot machines and blackjack or anything like that. But I'm saying, if these are classic examples, right? If I'm going to do a card shuffling application, then I made a card class. This would be the model that I'm testing. Well, maybe we'll do that too, just to give you an idea, right? Maybe not make sense in this context, but That's the first thing. So first thing we do is we set this up. Next, I want to test to see if I can initialize variables in my class. So think about what we're doing. When we're using test-driven development, I'm testing something that doesn't exist yet, right? So an example of this would be if I'm testing that the person has a name, right? So I want to see that when I initialize the name, that it actually works, okay? So I want to say something. My test is going to start with this. I want to say func test. So your test should always start with test, right? And then what you're testing. So init name, right? And then what is it going to return? So what am I looking for? If I'm initializing my name, it's going to return the name that I've initialized, right? So whatever the name that I've initialized, let's say for example, person.name is equal to Tom, it should return the name of the person, right? It should give me that back, right? Somehow. So how do I do this, right? So if I say, well, test in name, right? And then, returns, returns name of person, right? So when I initialize my name, it returns the name of my person. I can actually check to see the name of the person is equal, or something like that. It's good. The second part, the first part is what I'm testing, and the second part is what it's going to return. What kind of test result am I expecting, right? So if I initialize my name with a value, then I can test to see that that value is true, right? I can test to see that the value that I've entered is coming back as the value that I expect, right? Let's just say, we'll call it returns name of person. All right, so that's cool. So we've got this. And now we're going to do something like this. We're going to say, well, let's set the person, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say person dot, and you can see that I don't have this, but I want to say person dot name, right, is equal to Tom, right? Now, is this test going to pass right now the way it is? We've already got an error. And the reason for this is because, and this is how it is, first we want to fail the test. Remember red, right? And the first part of this is, well, it's going to give us an error. It says value type person has no member name, right? So this was what drives the test. My development, test-driven development starts with, I got nothing, and I'm going to add to it, right? I'm expecting my person to have a name. Well, it doesn't have a name. That means I'm going to add it. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to put in my value name. So I'm going to say var, as an example, name, which is a string. And you know what? I'm going to make it optional. Okay, can I do that? Yes. This class, right? I could have also used a struct. Those are good constructs, if you will. All right, cool. So can I do this then? Can I go person.name is equal to Tom? Is that going to be an issue, right? And when you want to run a test, this doesn't do anything. This just does this part here. If I want to build this thing as it is, right? If I go product, build, right? If everything goes well, it should build everything now because I've got a name of Tom, right? If it doesn't build, right, then it'll give me an error, right? Now it's still giving me this issue here, right? It says expected blank, right, argument list of function declaration. How come? What did I do wrong? Well, because I didn't do this, right? It's a function, right? So if I don't do this, it's not going to allow me to do that. So let's try this again. So product, I'm just building right now for my first time, right? Build succeeded. Okay, now that I've got my name is equal to Tom, I want to test if whatever I get from, whatever I put into it is what I get out of it, right? So how do I do that? I type xc assert, and if you guys have ever done an assert, just like it is in Android, it'd be almost the same, right? And I want to say is equal, right? Xc assert equal, and what I want to do is there's two expressions: the expression on the left, which is person.name, and the expression on the right, which is Tom. We want to make this fail, right? So I want to cause it to say something else, like Mike, right? Remember, we want to fail first, and then we want to succeed to confirm that the test is working. So what does this x assert equal do? It takes two values, and it compares them. And if it's equal, it's going to return true, and it's going to pass the test. So I'm going to save. And then to run a test, again, if you go to product, you can go to test, right? Or Command U. Let's use Command U. So we'll run the test. And by the way, it's going to run it on iPhone 6 as well on the other side. Still running the regular product itself. Still going to build and run everything, right? We haven't touched the interface yet. We're just still doing the logic behind it, right? And if it passes, right, after it tests, it's going to give us a really nice green check mark, right? That says you passed, right? Uh-oh. How come it didn't pass? Well, of course it's not going to pass. We put Tom, right? And we added Mike. So now we've proven that this has failed. This test failed. It's red. This is the red phase, right? Let's make it pass. So we'll put pass in Tom, right? Now we know this should pass, right? Or we think it should. Save, right? And then run the test again. So again, Command U for testing. It runs through. And then if it passes, we're going to make this red into green. Notice where we're at right here. There's the green check mark. Yay, we passed the test, right? Now we're good. We can go home now, guys. I'm joking, right? But this is the first part. If you notice, this is the inside this area right here. This is all of your unit tests in one place, right? So this is your project, and over here, right here, where it shows this mark right here, these are all the tests that we can do. Now, this is a very silly test, but imagine if we're going to do this for all of our things. So what else do we need for our person, right? We have to think about this. And we're thinking about this in reverse, because normally we do our person class, we try and think of all the properties, everything we need to do that's in our business requirements, right? We don't test like that. We don't write code like that if we're using test-driven development. What we do is we write all of our test cases for all of our initializers first, and then start writing everything else from a methods perspective, okay? So what's the next one? Well, maybe an age for the person. Tom, maybe if I need to know their age, or some kind of contact number, how about that? And this is only the name. What does the name mean? You know, name is first name, last name. And I haven't tested for length. I haven't tested for anything. You can make tests for all that stuff, right? Okay, let's continue. So let's suppose that I want to make another test. So we'll do another one, another initialization test, test init, and then we're going to initialize the contact number, right? And then again returns, you know, contact number of person. Notice how big my methods are, massive, right? And that's typical. Whenever you see a test method, two parts again. First part, what you're testing. Second part, what you're expecting for it to return, right? Okay, so again, we'll do the same thing. We'll say, just to give you to really pound it home for you guys, person.contact number, right, is equal to, 416, and we'll say 555-5555, right? There we go. And then, we got an error, right? There is no person.contact number. Contact number is not a member. So what do we got to do? We got to go back over here, and inside of our model, we're going to add it in, right? That's how we're building our stuff. So contact number, which is also a string. There we go. See how we're building this out, right? And now we're going to go back over here. We know that this is true, and we can do the same kind of assertion where we kind of make it fail first, right? Instead of person.name, we want person.contact number, right? And we also want to test the number as something else. So 416, 444, 4444. We want to make it fail, right? Okay. And we're going to test it out by pressing Command U. And if everything goes wrong or everything goes well, we're going to fail. Okay. Yay, it failed. Right? We want it to fail first because we want to make sure that the test is working. Right? Now we can put that test inside and make it work. Right? And we're going to test it out again, and we should get green. Now you guys are like, I'm telling you, when I first learned any kind of unit testing, it was like, but why? Right? Why would I care for this? This is crazy, right? I'm going to go through and test every piece, every unit, every small atom of my application. And you know the answer is, yeah, you would. What does this do? It reduces errors, right? It reduces bugs from the very beginning. Your logic is sound before you do anything, right? So instead of waiting to see errors afterwards, you make sure you eliminate errors from the beginning, right? That's the positive thing. On the downside, you can see how long this takes for me to add two things into a class, right? It's going to take a while, right? But here's the great thing. Once I set up these tests, sometimes what will happen is if I set up a test that passes, the old test that passed before might fail, right? Because I can affect my program dynamically, right? So that's the great thing about setting this up slowly, right? Okay, let's do one more. Give you guys some an idea of more stuff. So what else can my person class do? My person class can do things. One part is the model, right? And I might have a bunch of other things in my model, but maybe I have some kind of subclass that, you know, kind of is, maybe my person class is an abstract class or something like that. And my person class is going to, do different things. But one thing I want to check for sure is, you know, I want to be able to return my phone number, right? So some kind of, you know, get contact number, right? Okay, cool. So the person class can also return my phone number. So I can say func, right? Test. And again, test get contact number. That's the name of the function, right? And then returns, you know, contact number. This is something else, right? Same idea that I'm still returning contact number, but now I have something else. So again, I'm going to do the same test, person.contact number, right, is equal to 416. You guys have seen this before, 555-5555, right? And what I want to do is say xc test assert equal, right, where I'm going to say my person.get contact number, right, is equal to, and again, I'm going to make this fail, 416. So there's two parts to this, 444, 4444, right? So what's the first part? First part is, we don't have a get contact number. So we got to add that in, right? This part, value of person has no member get contact number. So this is going to drive us, remember test driven? This is going to drive us to develop something we're missing, right? So what are we missing? If I go back to my model class, right? I don't have a get contact number function, which is what I want to put in place. So func get contact number, right? And what I want to do with this one, it's going to return a string, right? Return the contact number. So I'm going to return, well, first of all, let's return blank. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to make it fail, remember? Make it fail. So this satisfies this, my function, because it returns a string, right? And now when I come back to my test, right, itself, if I do this, right, it's going to return a string. Now this is wrong, but it's wrong for different reasons. Let's make it fail. So the first thing is, let's try this out. So everything goes well. Oh man, what happened? It says argument type string does not conform to expresses type equitable. Why is that? I'm returning a string. I'm comparing a string with a string. Can I do that? So what's going on? Why am I getting something really weird here? Person.get contact number, right? Well, because get contact number is a method, right? That's the first thing. I have to actually call it, right? So that's a problem. Let's make sure that our test is correct. Let's go to the next part. Build succeeded. Everything is good, right? And then what we're going to do is it's going to fail, right? But it's going to fail for a couple reasons. Is look, x assert equal failed blank blank, right, is not equal to this that we're testing. Okay, cool. All right, so let's try this out. So we're going to go back to our tests, which is up here, our method. And instead of returning this, of course, we're going to return self.contact number, right? So that contact number is what's going to be returned. Okay. Now here's an issue. How come it's giving me this? It says, oh, well, I got to fix it because I got to unwrap it, right? Because it's an optional. Cool. Cool. Let's go back and let's check it out now. And I'm going to do the test again. Now it's going to fail for a different reason. It's going to fail because now we're actually gone to the point where I'm building out my my class, and when I'm passing into it, 416.555, whatever, is not what I'm getting back out of it, right? So when I pass into it is actually the value that I'm expecting to get back. And then test it again to make sure that it passes, right? There we go. Test. So you can see that I've got all these tests passing right now in each of these things. So imagine when you're doing the slot machine. You did a slot machine and you expected certain values back, right? You expected it, for example, to return things like cherry, grapes, and all this kind of stuff. What if you got something else that was different than what you expected, right? And how do you generate, you know, the reals itself, the reals function that I gave you, that idea, right? What it would do in that little function, what it would do is it would generate the random values. And then whatever the random values would be, you could actually test those values. You could actually break that method out a lot more than what it was. It was actually a big method that was kind of complex, right? But if you broke it out, what this does is says, hey, wait a minute, each method should just do one thing, right? Each method that you write in your class should only do one thing and one thing only. The more things the method does, the more complex it is, what's wrong, right? Each method, that's how we're gonna test atomically, if you will, right? Each method should do one thing, or approximately one thing, deal with one issue, one problem, right? Just like this one, get the contact number, returns contact number of person, right? Okay, well, that's getting the contact number, right? We can do the same thing for get name. We're not going to do that. But if I wanted to get name or get contact number or whatever, I can set up certain little methods to do that. All right, we've created a test for our model. And what I want to do is I want to make a list of names, right? List of names. And I want to add to that list, right? And I want to mark people as my favorite people somehow. So I might have a list of names. I have to do that. So I have to have like a person manager, kind of speak, right? Or some kind of, some kind of management class that allows me to add things to my names. Maybe call it my person controller, right? And if that's the case, it wouldn't be under models, right? I mean, it would probably be under some kind of controller, yeah? So let's make that new thing. We'll make a new controller because the logic, right, is usually put under controllers, not models. So let's make a new group, and we'll call this thing controllers. And just to be sure, you can see that we already have a view controller Swift. Let's put that in there too, right? Because view controller Swift is really a controller. We're just organizing here, right? And the same thing goes over here. Might as well create a new controller as well, new group. We'll call it controllers, controller tests. There we go. So we can group our tests so that they're not modeling our project. So here's our view controller, and inside our view controller, we're going to add a new file, which we're going to call. I'm going to get a Swift file again, and we'll call it the person controller. This is a different kind of controller. It's not a view controller, right? Notice it gets added to the product, the project itself, the product that we're creating, not my test suite. Okay, those are the two different things that happen here, right? So create. And notice we have this foundation. That's fine because we're not making any UI anything. It's not a UI kit that we're using. Here, what I'm gonna be creating is a person controller. So I'm gonna say class person controller, right? Cool. So I'm gonna get that part done. But what I want to do is I want to create a test for this. I'm going to make a new test case. So new test case. I'm going to say new file, right? I'm going to make a new test case. And the test case is going to be called the controller test case. It doesn't matter. Again, if I had only one controller, I would put controller test case. But now I might have the view controller test case as well, right? So here let's call this the person controller test case, right? Again, it's going to go. This one is going to go on the test side and create. So what am I doing? I've almost got like for every class, right? I've got like one test case, right? And my test suite is a bunch of test cases that I've got, right? That means I got like almost double the files. For every file, I have a file, right? And again, people argue that, and if you're on the other side of the fence, there's two camps on this one, right? One camp says, well, test-driven development is great, but it really slows down development, right? That's the con, right? On the other camp says, yes, it slows down development, but if you calculate how much it's going to slow you down if you don't do this, right, it kind of actually is less than making mistakes and correcting them. Okay, so there's two camps. it's difficult to wrap your mind around test-driven development because we've always been taught to model our objects first, write them all out, and then as we model things out, we write our code, right? But yet this is a totally different way of thinking. This is like, okay, fine, I need this, my problem. I have my model written out, but instead of writing my code right away, I'm creating tests to fail and then fixing those tests. Totally different way of thinking. And that's why it's difficult to do this in one day. You have to do this over a semester. We have complex tests that we're going to write in several assignments, right? And also, one thing I have to mention that is kind of out of scope from what I'm talking about today, which is, and I talk about it a lot in other classes, which is code reviews, right? There should be some kind of code review tool that you're using to check to see if your syntax is correct and that you're doing things efficiently, okay? Again, just like we did with the last one, in order for us to make this test case work, we need to do @testable, right? Import, and then the project that we're importing, which is, again, in this case, W2017, sorry, MAPD124, okay, I'm even forgetting, W2017, and that's lesson 12, right? If we don't do this, right, @testable import, we can't actually create a test that connects over here. In the real world, when you're doing Android, it's got to do the same thing. Your Android application, that part, has got to be accessible by your test project, right? Same thing with Visual Studio. If you're doing Visual Studio and you're working with Microsoft products, same idea. Your test case in Visual Studio, your test project, has to have access to your application project, right? And this would be the application side of my project. Okay, here again we have all these useless things. We're going to get rid of them. And just like we did before in the last test case where we wrote this, we kind of created this idea of a person class that we're going to be using throughout. I'm going to do the same thing here because otherwise I'd have to kind of, for every one of these, think about this, I'd have to go, okay, let person is equal to new person. That's like replication, right? And then, okay, person.name is equal to this, and so on, right? We'll come back to this in a second. All right, so let's set up that person class. Again, we're going to say let person, right, is equal of type person, right? And inside in our setup method, what I want to do is kind of say person is equal to new person, right? Now remember that if I was going to do any kind of person anything, it'd be in here, right? If I was going to use the person class. But I'm not using the person class, so this is not correct. What would it be? The person controller is what I want to create, right? So person controller is what I want in here, and this should be of type person controller, right? And now this person controller is going to be a new object of type person controller. Okay, so let person controller is what we're going to be using everywhere else, right? And down in here, we're going to make our new test function, our first one. And again, we're going to use the word test when we start off. We want to fail first. So remember, what I want to do is I want to test to see that when we add a person, right, to the person array, okay, I add a person to the person array, that the person I get back, right, when I test my person array, it returns the person that I put into it, right? How do I do that? How do I start? How do I break it down? What are your recommendations? Remember, I want to talk about initialization first. So how do I initialize or test the initialization of my person array, right? Maybe what I want to do is I want to test my array at a specific index, right, which is totally possible. So, for example, test person array at index, right, returns person, right? It's got to return a person. Okay. Hi. This is my test person array at index, whatever the index is going to be, and it's going to return my person array at index, whatever it is. Okay, cool. So now what we have to say is person array, right? Or person controller, sorry, person controller. And we're going to say something like add person, okay? And my add person is going to take a person, right? which is going to be a new person object. Here's where it gets really complex. And this person object, right? Did I initialize the name? I want to put the name of the object. This is kind of where it comes back to it, right? My name, where my name is Tom. Can I do this right now? There's a multiple problems here. What are the problems that I have? Anybody? You gotta help me out here, guys, or it's gonna be really boring and dry, right? Help me out. What's the problem with this last line that I wrote? I'm testing something that doesn't exist, right? I'm gonna get red. I'm already getting red, right? What's the problem with this one? Well, first of all, it says person controller has no member add person, right? No member add person. So that means that I got to add the person, again, test-driven development, I got to add it into my person controller. So that's the function I need to add. So let's add the function first. Satisfy that issue, right? So func, right? Add person. And we're going to look and see what it takes. It takes a person, that's the argument, right? Which is of type person. Cool. All right. So that satisfies that. I just do this by itself with nothing inside of it. It doesn't do anything else, right? And now if I go back to this, does it satisfy that problem, right? So person controller is no member, but it does now. So if I just kind of do that, if I kind of say, you know, command U and test it, right? It'll build it, and now I'm going to have some other issues. This is before the test actually runs. Okay. All right. Let's take a look here. Well, one thing is it's let. I got to change that from let to var. Okay. Cool. We can do that. That's going to satisfy that problem, right? Again, command U. Build failed. Argument passed a call that takes no arguments. That's number two. The second problem. I have a method that I'm using, an initializer method, where I don't have an init function, right? My init function doesn't take any values. Okay, I don't have an init function in my method, in my model. I mean, so here's my model. I just have a get contact number, right? So I could create an init method, right? Here's my init. And what I want to do is ask for a name, right? Which is a string. And of course, just like we do normally, we want to satisfy this requirement. Okay, so this is the first part. Well, if I'm writing this like this, this is going to satisfy my requirement for my test. Yeah, cool. And if I run it now, build failed. Why did it fail? Missing argument for parameter name and call. Here, right? Where we have our argument inside of our function. It's requiring an argument, a person's name, right? Okay, so that means that going back to our build, there's a couple of options we have for our person, right? One of them is to make a name optional or set up a default name, right? So it's optional with a value of blah, blah, right? That'll satisfy the requirement again, right? Will it? Let's go back. So go back to my test case and then run it again. Build. Okay. But did it really do anything, right? Did this do what I wanted to do, right? It passed. This thing passed, right? But it did return my person at index. I didn't write the test to fail. I wrote this test to do this. And by the way, when I set the person's name to Tom, right? I want to make sure that I get Tom back, right? Which makes me think that I got to update my test methods, my test case inside of my model test case. I don't have a test for that. And I always want to be able to test my model first, right? So inside here, inside my model, I want to create another test case to check to see if the initializer initializes the name, right? So func, this is my model test case now. Again, back in there, test init, right? Init name. Now remember, I've got init name here, but I got return names of returns name of person, right? But this is not what I want to do here. I want to make sure that my person, right, is equal to the person that I'm initializing, right? Okay, so person, person's name equals the name a parameter. Parameter. Again, you can write this in different ways. Something that makes sense to you is obviously different than this one. Two different functions, right? This is just talking about the initializer itself. This is actually initializing the name and making sure that the name parameter it equals what I'm putting in there, right? So again, I would say person.name is equal to Tom, right? Same exact thing. And by the way, you want to try and keep it the exact same all the time, right? Because that way you're not testing for different kinds of names. Right now you're testing for if the name is the same one. So you test the same. When you use it, when you make a test, you kind of separate your concerns. You concern yourself with the thing that you're testing. All right. You don't have to be flamboyant or creative here. All right. That's not the value. And now we're going to say something like this, right? Well, this is one way of initializing, but this is not what I want to initialize like. In fact, I'm okay to do it this way, right? Here's my person. This does it here too, right? But in this case, person is equal to person. I want to check to see that my initializer works. This is the option. I can pass in an optional value. But what if, can I reinitialize stuff? Can I do this? Is it possible to do this? Or would this give me an error? Person name is equal to Tom. Because I've already initialized, right? Is that going to give me a problem? I've done it here in my, whenever this will run, this runs every time I run my test. Okay? Well, this clash with this. I'm reinitializing. I'm redeclaring, if you will. Well, let's try it. So, failed, succeeded, right? And it comes down to it. Should pass my tests. Let's see. Test succeeded, so it didn't give me an issue, right? Okay, cool. So this worked, this part here, right? So if this is the case, now what I want to do is I want to say, well, if I initialize it with Tom this way, not this way, right? Then I want to make sure that the parameter that I sent into my initializer matches what my test is going to be. So I'm going to say xc assert equal. I'm going to pass in the value Tom, and then I'm going to do the same thing, person.name, right? So my name is equal to the value that I got in after I've done this test. By the way, whenever I do this kind of stuff, each individual test, right, as an example, is run separately. It's almost like a little closure of its own. So don't worry what's happening here. Because I've initialized person.contact number here is 5555555, doesn't mean that it's initialized over here. In fact, it's not. Okay? Cool. So let's run this thing and let's see if I can pass that test again. And then I'm going to just, now what I should have done is fail the test first, pass in Mike or something like that, make sure it fails, right? Oh, well, this failed anyway. This is great. Okay. Well, here's something. It says Tom is not equal to nil. All right. So that's interesting. So I'm testing, and this is a great way. I mean, I didn't expect this result. Let's go back and see what the problem is. So, well, here's what I'm doing. I'm saying, well, I'm setting up a name, but my default name is equal to this, right? And unless I should set something up that, something else in here other than nil. Like, for example, unnamed, or unknown, something like that. My name is unknown. I don't have a person that has no name, right? In this particular case, it doesn't make any sense, but let's just suppose we do this. So it failed, right? And now that it failed, by the way, I want to definitely save that. I'm bad at that. And now that it failed, I want to test it again and make sure that it passes. All right. And once we've done this, it failed again. It says Tom is not equal to nil. How come? What did I do wrong? Right? Here's my initializer right here, right? Here. Right. Even though I did this, it doesn't really matter, does it? Right? Even if I pass it in, I have to do self.name, which we've done many times before, is equal to the name that I'm getting into my parameter, right? So of course that's going to fail. But what's funny, I set it to unknown. What happened, right? Well, even if we go back and do this, you see, I try to think about this. Is this nil? Right. So My mind was thinking it was nil, but actually it's not. It's the empty string, which is totally different. This is what I really want, right? This is where test-driven development can help us out a lot, right? So build, and then we're going to just do the test in a second. Let's do the test, I said. So we'll do a test. Build failed. Okay, what did it fail? I added this extra thing for whatever reason. My little fingers that made the error, right? And then, let's see if it tests true now, right? Yay, we passed. This part is passed. Now we're going to go back to this test over here, right? Because now we can add a person, right, with this stuff happening over here. But what we want to do is we want to test, want to finish this test off. We've only done one part of the test. It returns person at index, right? Whatever the person is at the index. Okay, so person controller add person. It did that. Fine. Did it? And what I want to say is person controller. So I'll say var returned person is equal to person controller dot person at, right? Person at, and we'll say index, right? And we'll say index 0, right? Person at index 0, right, is what it's going to be equal to, right? Okay, so that's what it's going to return, and it's going to return a person. This is the return person. Uh-oh, we have a problem. It's going to fail again because there is no person at method, which means we have to add that into our person controller. Right, so here we go back to the person controller. I hate that. And we're going to go back to person controller. And under here, well, we haven't addressed this part at all yet, right? This is going to be another issue, but we ignore it for now. We keep moving, right? It's not what we're testing. And we're going to go back to here, and we're going to say person at, and then we're going to say index, right? And it's going to be an integer, right? And it's going to return, right, a person. That's what it's going to do. We're going to return, as an example, some kind of new person, right? Which we're going to make, it's going to be called Tom. That'll satisfy my requirements. It's not correct though. Okay. And of course, it says that I need a name attribute, which is good. This is what I can do. So this is it'll pass this way, right? But it won't get what I want, right? Person at index, right? By the way, this is how a lot of functions in Swift are written. Person at, and then index is inside of our parameter, right? It's our way of doing things. Add person, right? This is incorrect. This shouldn't be this shouldn't be written this way. It should be add, and then person, right? That should be written differently than this from a Swift style perspective. So again, this is something we may have to address later on, just from a style guide, right? Okay, cool. Let's go back to our test case. You can see the problem here, right? But I'm going slow so you can see it. Okay, so return person is equal to person controller at index 0, right? We get an integer, and returns a person. This is the return person. That's the first part, right? Let's build it first to see if that part builds. First, we need to get this built. Can't build, can't test, right? We need to get rid of that issue. Okay, cool. It says now we have a warning that says we're return person we didn't use, and now we're going to compare the return person, right, with a person that we're going to the whatever the person is, with the person that I added in, right? Okay, well, here's a return person, and I want to check to see if the person's .name, right, is the same name as the person that I added. That's a good test, right? Let's check this out. So it'd be like this: xc start equal, right? And the first part is going to be the person that I've already added. So we're going to say the person at return person, right? .name. Right, and we're going to make the name Tom, right? So we're going to test the name, whatever that is. Okay, we're going to check to see that those names are correct. Tom, right? But we're going to check another name. We're going to check Mike, because we know Tom is the one we want, right? Just to make sure it fails. So save, and then test. Here's something. It says, variable return person was never mutated. Consider changing to let constant. That's a good recommendation. So make that let. And this part says, it failed. Optional Tom is not equal to optional Mike. Right? So Mike came in. Tom is the one we're checking. Those two are different. Let's change it to Tom. Right? And let's see if it's going to work now. So try this out. Okay, but this is a false positive, right? Because what we did, actually, if you think about it, and I'm going to test something else out. Let's suppose that we made it Mike here, and we're waiting to to get Mike down here. Here's the other test, right? And if I was to check this out again, here's another value, right? And I'm supposed to get Mike back, but actually I'm going to get something else, right? Let's check this out. It failed. Why? Because I'm still getting Tom back, right? Why? Because inside of my test, if I go back into my person controller, right, you can see that I'm setting up the person itself is a fixed person. I'm sending back this other object here, which is wrong, right? I should be returning the person at a particular array index, but I never set up the array in the first place, right? So I'm missing this piece in order for me to do this piece. So now I got to set up that person. So we're going to make a new variable called person array. Here's my person array. And my person array is going to be equal to an array, right, of type person. There we go. There's my person array. Okay? So my person array, when I add a person, right, it's going to be added in, right? So even when I'm adding the person in, it's not really doing anything. I'm returning something, but I'm not really returning anything because my person array has never been added to. So I got to modify my add person method in order for me to make this test work. By the way, this test could have been written in many smaller tests. I'm just jumping ahead because I don't want to bore the crap out of all you guys, right? But if you think about this, I could atomize this into much smaller tests before I get to this test. You can see I'm failing a lot, right? And when I fail this many times, it means that my test is too big. Okay? So here in my add person, as an example, what I want to do is I want to, my person array, right? Person array, append, and I want to add in a new person. In this particular case, I'm going to add the person that I'm getting in to the array. Right? So I'm adding this person to the person array. Yay. Now, what I want to do is I want to return the person at this array, wherever the index is, back out. In this particular case, it's only one of them, right? So I want to add in that person. So what I want to do is I want to say something like this. I want to say person array, then at index, right? And whenever you read square brackets, thinking about saying the word in your mind, at. Person array at 0, person array at 1, person array at 2, person array at index, wherever the person array is at index, that's what I want to return. Okay. Let's go back to here and test it and see if it works now. So we're going to try and, we're asking for Mike, right? And we're getting Mike back. And let's try this out. If it's true, we should get Mike back and we should pass now, right? So command U. Index 0, right, which is the only one we have in there. We're going to return Mike back. And we pass. All right, so now we're passing this test. And as you can see, we're starting to build out our controller, right, our person controller. Slowly, we're adding different methods to the controller. And we're also going to add initialization to the controller as well, just like we did with the model. Okay, so let's recap, because that's enough, right? Because, it's all you need, for the most part, to do test-driven development or unit testing for ILIA, all right, for your project class, okay? Remember, the three things you have to remember is red, green, refactor. Red means you have to fail, right, fail first and fail often, right? Green means as soon as you fail the test, you make sure that it passes. And you might want to pass it with different test cases. So A test case might be Mike or Tom, and maybe you want to pass a bunch of different things to make sure that they all pass, right? Like, for example, all I'm passing here, right, in my person controller test, that's not what I meant to do. My person controller test, I'm only testing one value, right? But what I can do is, if I want to, I can test for many values. For example, right, let's say I want to add in not just Mike, right, but Tom as well, right? I can test this out. So I can take two values here like this, and one of them is going to be Tom, right? And what I want to say is let return person 1, right, is equal to return person at 0. We know that Tom was added first, so therefore it should be Tom coming back, right? So return person 1 should be Tom, right? Here's my test now. And I can do the same thing. I can make this another let statement here. You can go as crazy as you like here in these tests, right? Or return person 2 is index 1, right? To test both two different ones, to know that whether it's 0 or 1, you're going to get back, different values based on the index that you're looking at, right? Again, of course, I would make it fail first, right? Like this. It's reversing, right? Person 2, right? So this is wrong. Both of them wrong, right? And then when I run my test now, right, you can see that they're going to both fail, right? Because both of them are in the wrong place, wrong positions, right? And then I would do one at a time, right? For example, it says optional Tom, right? And if you actually read this thing, is not equal to the Mike that I'm looking for. So let's make this one pass, because 0 is this one and 1 is this one. I'm actually testing the other way around. So I'll put Tom here. So I'll make one pass at a time, right? Right? And so I'll just do one of these. So one will pass and the other will fail. Watch. So now it's going to make, this one's going to be a check, right? And this one's going to be an X. You can see this line passed, but this line failed. So now I can change this back to Mike. I'm doing 2 asserts, right? And when I change this one now, you can see that this test is a little better than the other one because that one only tested one test case, right? This one has a couple of test cases, and so it's more valid, right? And you can some people make it so that there's like a certain number of test cases, right, for every one of these ones. So we know that it can return different values. We can prove that it returns different values here, right? Without actually running my code. Now here's a question for you. Do I have a UI? No. Do I have debug statements? No. I have test. And this is much better than debugging, right? Like debug.log as an example. Or printing of any kind. If I print all the time, it's okay if I can't find an error, if there's a bug in my code. But here, I prevent bugs from happening from the very beginning. I know that my methods, before I even start using them, right? Before I even start applying these methods, they're going to already work. And I'm going to do that as I write. I'm going to write cases and tests before I actually do any kind of calculations or logic. My logic is going to include tests as I'm writing it. It's very complex. But at the end of the day, what it ends up doing for me is it helps me reduce code duplication and bugs within my code. And with Swift, one of the biggest problems we have is lots of bugs, right? Lots of little things that happen to us we don't expect. Okay, questions around unit testing. And this is like unit testing 101, guys. This is not like, heavy-duty unit testing. You guys should all know at this point just the basics of how to set up a unit test, right, and how to test your logic. Okay. No questions? You guys are golden? All right, let's take a short break. And when we come back, I want to take a look at your game. Let's take a look at your game. I'll give you some critique on your game. See if it goes well. If anyone wants to show their game, they can come up to the class and show their game to everybody else if you're really proud of it, right? And then no one's proud of their game? How about Jasmine? Jasmine, you proud of your game? No? Let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll look at them.